bringing you the best music from home studios across the world. This is Taetro Radio.
What's going on, everybody? This is Taetro, back with an all-new episode of Taetro Radio. And oh man, did Christmas come early this year or what? Two new gear announcements this week. The Akai MPK Mini Play. So basically a version of the MPK Mini, everybody's favorite MIDI controller, with sounds built in. It's got a little mini screen, not unlike the Native Instruments Machina Micro and the other Native Instruments stuff. Got that little teeny tiny screen, and it's got sounds built in, a speaker built in, almost like circuit-like. So that's interesting. And then also the Novation SL MKIII 49, some of those things in whatever order, I'm not sure, but another giant controller slash synth controller from Novation. That's like crazy. It looks ridiculous. We can talk a little bit more about those later in the show, but we have some awesome submissions from some home studio musicians from all over the place, some beginners, some vets of even the podcast. But we're gonna start things off with a producer named Klaudia Skóra, and this is her first finished track. She says, "I'm just a beginner. This would be my first finished track I've ever done. Be gentle if you use it." It's inspired by the views in Ireland. The music is simple, nothing special. Ireland is great, and I recommend to go there. All right, well, let's listen to Irish River by Klaudia Skóra. Check it out. All right, that was Irish River by Klaudia Skóra from Warsaw. Coming all the way from Warsaw to submit to the podcast. Very cool. And reminder that this is Klaudia's first finished track, and inspired by the scenery in Ireland. She notes that the music is simple, and yeah, music definitely simple. And I appreciate simplicity, so I appreciate that aspect of this track, especially the sounds. You've got like kind of a very mellow, retro-y kind of vibe going on. It's especially with the lead synths, the slow attack for most of the sounds. That was really cool. And it seems like you have an idea about arrangement too, because there are clear sections. Usually they're marked by the drums dropping out, so that happens around just over 1 minute in. It happens again about 2 minutes in. You can sort of see very clear sections of this song. I especially liked the clean guitar in the song. Sounds like that's played in. My first critique of this track would be, let that guitar come out more and just bring it out, feature it. Right now it's kind of like playing along with the synths, playing behind them a little bit. Towards the end it starts to play a little bit high, but I would have loved to hear a section where the drums drop out and it's just maybe a synth with that guitar taking the lead, because that sort of separates the track from being just, you know, a mellow synth and drum machine, because you've got the guitar which brings in the real world element sort of, so it sort of grounds it. For the drums, you have like a pretty basic beat running through the whole thing that doesn't really change all that much. One way to add variation, if you do want to keep it simple and basic, is just to use the different combinations. Like right in that pattern, you've got kick, snare, and hi-hat. So that means you have a pattern with just kick, a pattern with just snare, a pattern with just hi-hat, and then all the combinations of those three. So I would say play with those different combinations, you know, kick, snare, kick, hi-hat, just hi-hat. And then if you space those out a little bit more, it'll sound a little bit less monotonous, because especially for that middle section that goes for almost a whole minute with the same drum loop, I was looking for something more eventually by about halfway through that. Another simple way to add some variation to that drum beat would be to just add a little bit of nuance to the hi-hats. Like maybe the velocities, like maybe you should physically play them in so that the velocities will automatically sort of be varying, but you can also draw that in depending on what DAW you're using, like draw in the velocity so that they are different levels and it sounds a little more natural. Also add a couple stutters here and there, so they're very straight eighth note hi-hats for the most part. Add some stutters in that, especially in that section where it stays mostly the same the whole time. Yeah, but I really love the lead sounds, the almost trumpet type sounds. Those were like the coolest part of the track for me, I think, because it was very like floating on a cloud. I could almost hear this in some kind of indie movie with like James Franco in it or something. I don't know. But yeah, I didn't mind this tune. I think another way you could take this track to the next level is take a field recorder with you next time you go to Ireland and just record some of the sounds while you're hanging out in the scenery, and just lay that behind a track like this, because a track like this has probably a strong inclination to go the lo-fi hip-hop route almost. I could almost hear it on one of those stations, and if you add that field recording element, that would just like bring it to the next level for that. But love the way things come together in the end. Also, like, even though we could vary some of the musical ideas a little more often, you did keep it in clear sections where there was something new to pay attention to each section. I just wish there was a little more variation on top of that for each section, but definitely not a bad first effort. Thank you so much for the submission, Klaudia. Great work. Alright, so if you've been listening to the past couple episodes of the podcast, you know that in addition to doing track reviews, I'm also going to take some Q&A from taetro.music at gmail.com. I'll also pull them from my comment section or even Patreon, and that's where the first question's coming from today. If you don't know, I just like revamped, quote unquote, my Patreon, where there's only one tier. It's a $1 contribution, and that gets you access to the Taetro Facebook community, gets you a download to a music folder that I have on my Google Drive. And I'm going to be doing some exclusive live streams over there too, but I'll also accept the questions from there. And the first question comes from a new patron. Her name is Sandra, and she asks, just a question. I know you have been working with Ableton, but is there ways you can show us how to really get the best out of other DAWs? Thanks. For me, right now, the answer is just no, because I've been using Ableton for over 10 years, and it's just like been my home, and I haven't really needed to use anything else. Before I was using Ableton, I was doing more acoustic and band stuff, and I was using Reaper because it was free, and it was a pretty powerful multi-track DAW. And that was sort of your more traditional, I could sit down and record a song from start to finish. With Ableton, I'm just doing so much different kinds of work, from making beats, scoring projects, just like my own fun music projects, like live performance too. And what I'm finding is that there's no other DAW that can do all those things and be good at them all at the same time. And I know a lot of people are scared of Ableton, and I don't really know why that is, but I wish they would give it a try. I have looked at other DAWs though, and I know a lot of people use Logic. A lot of people use FL Studio, of course. And maybe one day I'll get into them, but it just seems like none of them really do the things that I need them to do well. Sure, I could use Logic or FL Studio for beat making like most people do, but then what am I going to do when I want to do a live performance? But that brings me to another point, is that Akai actually just released a controller that is for FL Studio called the Fire, and I'm a little bit interested in it, even though I'm not an FL Studio user. I'm interested because when you look at it, it doesn't look like a typical MIDI controller. It almost looks like a synth sequencer, because like it's set up like a synth, like a step sequencer. So sort of like a rectangle, almost like a little bit smaller than a circuit, I would imagine. The pads are pretty small, because I think most of the time in FL Studio people are working in step sequencers, which I think is really interesting, but not my style. So I thought that was cool. I mean, we know that Akai started making all the Ableton specific controllers like way back with the original APC40 and things like that. So it's cool that they're moving on and helping other DAWs. Hopefully it doesn't stop any type of like Ableton support, but good for FL Studio users. I'm glad they finally have an exclusive controller, and if you're using FL Studio, you should totally check it out. I can't speak on it because I love Ableton, so that's sort of where I'm at. Maybe one day I'll switch just for fun, but not right now. Right now, Ableton does everything I need it to do. Thank you for the question though, Sandra. I appreciate it. Alright, let's get back into it with another track from the community. This one is from an artist named Censor, and if you've been listening to the podcast, you've heard his work before. He's 23, from St. Anne, Illinois, and this track has a pretty interesting story behind it, but we're going to talk about that after we listen to it. So let's check out All-Ghor Rhythm by Censor. Check it out.
This is Taetro Radio.
All right, that was All-Ghor Rhythm by Censor Glitch. Ooh, that track is hot and it moves fast. But let's talk about how this track was made first, because I think you'll find it pretty interesting. So in Censor Glitch's note about the track, he says, so one day at the ungodly hour of 3 a.m., I was on YouTube looking up random videos until I came across one that was titled, When a Sorting Algorithm Makes a Sick Beat. And then he links to the video. And I thought to myself, I can make it cooler. So a quick sampling, and a few hours later, this track came to be. That's like so dope, because it's kind of like field recording, but instead of going out into the world, you go out into the internet and you like take sounds out of the internet and you make them cool and you make samples out of them. And I think there's an idea there. Maybe I'll have to make videos about that. I don't know. That sounds cool. But so I looked up what a sorting algorithm is, and it appears that it's just this way of sorting data. And I guess it's something a lot of early computer science majors will learn. And it's basically just, and if you look at the visualization too, you can see it happening on screen. It's just like a very fast animation. You can tell the computer is doing something crazy, taking a bunch of numbers, putting them in order or something like that. And I guess what a lot of people have done is taking the data and creating audio out of it. So basically assigning sounds to the algorithm. I don't know, I guess I'm not explaining it very well, but it seems very complicated. But a lot of people are doing this on YouTube, where they just let the sorting algorithm run and it makes like ridiculous sounds like what you're hearing in this track, but not like an actual track. So kudos to Censor Glitch for making this like a full out track, because that's really awesome. But yeah, that's super cool. And if you go to Censor Glitch's SoundCloud, he's got it up there, and the link is in the description of the podcast. He explains sort of the process and says most of the synths were actually presets from Vandalism, Shocking Electro for Serum. And if you share this around, I'm sure Censor Glitch will be very happy. But he's got a ton of plays on SoundCloud on this track, and I just think it's like, this sounds like a banger, like a dubstep banger, and it all came from taking the sound of a sorting algorithm and just like tweaking it and making it into that, which I think is really cool. So you can find dope music and dope samples anywhere. That's something people ask me, like, where do you get your samples? Where do you do this? You can literally just go anywhere. I like to go outside. Some people like to go on the internet. I don't know. I'm not really going to critique this that much, because I think the idea is like really good. I mean, what can I say? It's got sections. It's under 3 minutes long, which is like super tasteful. I can survive with anything for under 3 minutes. It's got clear sections. The sounds all sound tight, and you took samples from a sorting algorithm. So great track, Censor Glitch. Thank you so much for submitting. All right, let's take another question from the community. And remember, if you have questions for the podcast, you can submit them at taetro.music@gmail.com, and I will read them and do my best to answer them. So this question comes from Jake, and Jake says, I just looked on the App Store of my Mac and saw that Logic Pro X was only $319, and I have also been looking into the Education Edition of Ableton Standard, which is around that same price point anyway, and I'm looking into buying one of the two as an Australian 13-year-old getting into music producing. So I was wondering what would be better for me, Ableton Standard or Logic Pro X. I have a Launch Key Mini and a Launchpad Mini, and using Ableton Live 9 Lite and the trial of Live 10 Suite, what DAW should I get? This is a good question and very similar to the last question, and of course I'm partial because I'm an Ableton user. And if the details like weren't here, like if you just said, what should I get, Logic Pro X or Ableton, I would probably say, are you going to perform at all, or are you just going to be making beats? Because if you're just going to be making beats, go with Logic. That's fine. If you're interested in performance, if you're interested in like more electronic music style things other than just beat making, then I would say Ableton. But then you add in the details of you already owned Ableton based gear, Launch Key Mini and Launchpad Mini, and you've already been using Ableton Live 9 Lite and the trial of Live 10 Suite. It's a no-brainer here. You gotta get Ableton. Get it while you can as a student, because that's what I did. When I first bought Ableton, I was in college. I sent them a scan of my student ID and I got a big fat discount on Suite. And you might even think about getting Suite yourself. I know you're gonna go for the standard, but that's not always in everybody's budget. The good thing about standard is you get a fair amount of stuff, and then anything you really want to add on, you can go into Ableton Shop and add it on individually. So it shouldn't be a bother. I'm sure I have so many things included in Ableton Live Suite that I don't even use. I wonder if I could get away with standard. I don't know. But you already own the gear. Like, think about the investment you've already made in the Launch Key Mini and the Launchpad Mini. You're not going to be able to use those as it was intended with Logic. Sure, you can get away with using the Launch Key Mini with Logic, but you'll be just missing out on so many features that they built that thing for. Just go with Ableton. You won't regret it. You already know it, so you might as well stick with it. That's my 2 cents, Jake. Thank you for submitting your question. Speaking of Novation, on the Novation side of things, we need to talk about the new gear that got released this week, the new editions of the SL series from Novation. And I'm not sure what makes the well, I know what makes the SL different. I'm just not sure if I'm going to get it all in my description. But so you have the Launch Key series that are basic MIDI controllers, right? They're USB. They don't got much else going for them other than USB. But then you've got the SL controllers that have so much more control because they have MIDI in and out, MIDI through. They have analog clock out and CV for pitch, gate, and mod outputs. So it's basically a MIDI controller, a sequencer for synths, and you can control your synths with this controller. That said, of course, these are more expensive than just a normal USB MIDI controller. So the 61 key version is retailing for $699 right now, which is a pretty hefty price, especially if you're a beginner. But if you're somebody who uses a lot of synths and uses Ableton, whew, I think that this is just the way to go. I think that for my purposes, I can probably get away with just a Launch Key, and I have a Launch Key 49 on my desk right now, and it works perfectly. But, oh, I might have to get one of these. But basically, if anybody knows anything about the Novation circuit, it's got a really good sequencer on it where you can sort of like build up beats right on the box. And it looks like they've taken that sequencer and gone ahead and put it into the SL. And it's been a few years since we've had a SL release. If you look at pictures, just Google Novation SL Mark II. You can see, just by looking at that gear, you can tell that it's been a while since it's been updated because it's got the old gray look to it. Not to say it wasn't stylish back in the day, but you can tell it definitely didn't age well. And now the new SL Mark IIIs, these just look like, you know, they look like top of the line controllers. They're almost similar to some of the Native Instrument stuff. My wings are done, but that's really cool. Like, the keys illuminate. It shows you what notes are in key. You can also make it so it skips the notes that are not in key. There's just a lot of really cool features. I do implore you to check it out, and I do want to check one out soon as well. But while I go get my wings out of the oven, we are going to play the last track of the night. And I'm going to preface this by saying, you know, this is a little weird one. This isn't your typical Taetro Radio submission. This is a little more experimental, I would say. So this track is by an artist called Sthesia. I see what you did there. Who is 43 from Wisconsin. And this track is called Common Enemies. Let's listen.
In
listening to Taetro Radio.
All right, that was Common Enemies by Sthesia. Sthesia is 43 and from Wisconsin, and the note about the track says, new track using VCV Rack. I had to look up what that was, and I guess it is a virtual, open source virtual modular synthesizer, which is cool. Looks like it's free. You just download it. You can download it as a plugin, it seems. And they have it for Mac, Windows, and Linux, which is pretty cool. I like free stuff, but I'm not super into modular, so I don't know about that. Used Ableton for mastering, and there's also a video that goes along with this track that I will put in the description, along with a link to Sthesia's new album called Small Puppies on iTunes, so you should go check that out. So yeah, like I said, leading up to this track, this is not your typical Taetro radio track. I think this is more of, like, for me, an art installation type track. It definitely has some type of political angle with the clips from speeches in there, which is pretty cool. I definitely appreciate things for that. And I think when you watch this with the visuals, it makes a bit more sense, and it just goes together well. I think that this track is, I don't want to say hard to listen to, because I don't mean that. I want to say it's like, it's just the message is brought out a lot more clearly when you combine it with visuals, for sure, and you lose a lot of that with just listening to it. So definitely go check out the video. But one critique I have for the track is just that The highs, the super high synths are a little bit like, they hurt my ears a little bit. I had to turn the track down. I would just be careful on those super, super high frequencies because they can sort of just annoy people. But the one thing that kind of kept me going through the track was definitely the pulsing bass, that boom, boom, boom. Having that element, because a lot of the elements aren't super recognizably musical. You don't have a lot of real like gestures or melodies, but that right there really grounded it for me. So I really appreciated that. And yeah, if you want to make sounds like this or experiment, definitely go check out VCV Rack. It looks like it's free and you can download it on Ableton, Windows, or Mac. Definitely implore you to do that. And go check out the video for this track for sure. I am going to answer one final question from my comment section because this question I get a lot. And just somebody happened to ask it the other day. Juan says, how do you record the whole session? So this is a comment on one of my live sessions, and it's a question I get like on all of them, and I do different things for different sessions, I will say, but I have one that I typically do the most. This comment is on my Rain video. Rain is like one of the first live performances I did on the channel. It might be the first live performance on the channel. And that one I did differently than I do now because that was a while ago and I didn't know what I was doing. So for that session, I'm using Launch Key, Launchpad, Launch Control, and my laptop. And then I also have the Focusrite, which I'm running sound out of. So I'm listening to sound through like a big speaker while I'm doing the session because I'm playing out loud. But I'm not recording with that. I'm recording all in Ableton. So if you can imagine like an Ableton session view set, and then I press the arrangement record button at the top, and then I start the session. So this way has an advantage because it captures all the MIDI and recorded audio, and you can go back and edit it after if you wanted to. Like say you wanted to record something live for an album, but you wanted to maybe tweak it. You didn't want it to be like printed right away. That's how I used to do it, but there's drawbacks to that because Ableton session view will behave very strangely while you are recording in the arrangement side of things. I don't know. I guess there's like just crossed wires between those two things. So certain things like with the controllers, I would have to hit arm twice on a track, or I would have to physically arm a track, whereas with the Launch Key Mini, you should be able to just scroll through them and that wouldn't work. It's very odd. So what I do now, and this is my favorite method now, is I will play out through speakers if I can. I like to do that if possible. So that means I take my Focusrite Scarlett 2i2, I crank the big knob so that I can hear everything out of my speakers, and then through the headphone output, I run an aux cable into a Tascam recorder and record everything onto that. I just make sure the level's okay, I play the loudest part of the track, test it, okay, level's good, and I just record it. The only drawback of that is you don't get multi-tracks out of that. You literally just get one final track that you can upload or sync with video, which is what I do. And I like that the most because it captures the performance, it forces me to be super accurate, it forces me to make sure that what you're seeing is what you're hearing, all that, and I get to do both. I get to hear it and I get to record it. So that is my favorite method for recording my sessions. But that is all the time we have for today on the Taetro Radio podcast. So I want to thank you so much for listening. If you're interested in submitting a track to Taetro Radio, you need to become a member of the Taetro Facebook community, and that is an invite-only community that you can get into by just sending me a message on Facebook. Say, hey, I want in the community. I'll send you the link. You'll get in, and you get to be a part of this cool group of like-minded home studio music producers from across the world. And that's how I pull tracks for this show. If you don't yet, make sure you go and subscribe, youtube.com/Taetro. Click the subscribe button. I do upload the podcast on YouTube as well as Anchor, Apple, Google, all those places. So wherever you're listening, please leave a rating because it really helps out the show. But thanks to all the producers who submitted this week. That was like really cool. And you can find links. If they sent me social links, I put them in the description below. I don't think everybody did this week though. But make sure you go show love on their pages and let them know you came from Taetro Radio. That would be awesome. So make sure you come hang out, watch a couple videos on youtube.com/Taetro, and then stay tuned for the next episode of the podcast. Thanks so much to our voice of God, Jerry. Thanks to all of the Taetro community for constantly supporting. We are are on the road to 50,000 subscribers, and I can't believe it. Couldn't have done it without this community, but thank you all so much. This has been taetro. Have a good one.
From the taetro community exclusively on Taetro Radio.